Writer, director, Mark Christopher. Producer, Ira Deutchman. Editor, Lee Percy. And I think production designer, Kevin Thompson. Are you going to join us?
KT.
Where's Kevin? Oh, do you want to do
Sorry.
Sorry.
We can hold your questions if you need to. If you can't hold it, we'll hold them.
Congratulations, guys.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Well, this film has had quite a journey. We're going to talk in a little bit about what happened nearly 20 years ago, and then we're going to also talk about how you got the film. You touched on it at the beginning, how you got the film back to the point where we see it today. It looks great. It sounds great, this theater. But I just want to start with one question, Mark, and then we can go down the row as well. When you look at the film now, time has passed. You've had the chance to revisit it. How do you feel about the movie now? How do you feel? What's your relationship to the film like? And I'm sure for various reasons we're going to dig into, it's complicated, but as of this moment.
Well, when you make a movie and you are editing it, and in this case, fine cutting it, you're so sick of the movie you can't watch it anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit there, but I must say that I saw it at Outfest in 2008, and I looked at the movie and I thought, this movie works. It was a movie that I really liked, and so I had that sort of distance. Now I don't really have that distance. Now it looks like, I see every cut, I see every kind of harsh cut that shouldn't be there that Lee would probably kill me for. There are a lot of music edits.
You'll hear about those later.
Yes, he's going to beat me up later. There's some music transitions that aren't the smoothest because, you own a song for 19 seconds, not 20 seconds, and that's all very important. But I would say, who is it who said you never finish a film, you just abandon it? So after 17 years, it's time to abandon this film and let you all, watch it and hope you like it.
Well, let me ask the same question of Ira Deutchman, and then we'll go down the row. But Ira, what's your relationship to the film today, and how do you process the experience with the benefit of time?
I mean, one of the interesting things from my point of view is that this is the film that I always thought we were making. It was the film that was in the script. It was the film that was in all the rough cuts that I saw. So in a way, it doesn't look new or different to me. It looks like what I remember. And at 55, I only saw that film once, and I actually kind of don't remember it very well. So
that's more than me, Ira.
Yeah, so
I saw 55 in the final sound mix at Skywalker and never looked at it again.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it at the premiere. That was the only time I ever saw it. So this doesn't seem new to me. But one thing that is true, though, is that I felt like, and again, this is based on rough cuts and watching 55, somehow watching this now, it seems more authentic than it did then. And I think it's the passage of time. I think that, I'm one of those people who actually did spend some time at Studio 54 in these days. And there were aspects of the film that always struck me as being not exactly the way I remembered it. And I think at this point, enough time has passed that I simply don't remember it. And as a result, it seems completely authentic now.
And since he doesn't remember it, it means he was really there.
Yeah.
Lee, the same question, but I think that by asking you this question, it also allows us to start delving into the backstory. Tell us about your relationship to this film now, and eventually we'll go back and talk about your relationship to the film and editing it at the time, but I'd love to see how you process it and think about it now.
I'm not sure if I ever really saw 55 all the way through, but this is both very familiar and also a new experience for me because it has been 17 years. And so a lot of it, and I haven't seen it in that time. Mark and Ira have been working with the film. They've been restoring it. They've been tracking pieces of it down. So for me, I was looking at it and saying, did we do that? You know, I was remembering all of the great stuff that we came up with. I know you guys have done some more inventing as time has gone on, but also it's been kind of a rediscovery for me, because a lot of it's been long enough that a lot of it seems very new.
Kevin?
I thought everybody looked really young. But similar to Ira, I felt that it was the movie that I remember making. You know, I don't remember the other one that much. And I remember many things about the process. I mean, for me, it's a nostalgic trip, and really fun and really fantastic. So I have not been living it in the experience that you guys have. I've been separated from it for 17 years, and for me, it's like going back and having all that fun again, and remembering little things in Toronto that happened that were really fun. So
Toronto, where you shot the
yeah.
film.
I have to say that Kevin built a set that was that was 54, and we actually had the rap party on the set. It was
That's right,
it was a
that's
remarkable. We could have sold tickets to that stage.
That rap party.
we made a lot. We
talk
got a
about that
lot
rap
for the
party.
money up there. Yeah.
I mean, just to be clear to everybody, he built the set of Studio 54 in Toronto.
Yeah,
That
so it was on. It was
yeah.
on. It was like at 85%. Everything except the balcony, right?
Right. And we started by building a theater, and then built the club inside the theater so that it would feel sort of that layering of history, and it was pretty authentic. Pretty authentic.
Yeah, you had the whole. Kevin was an architect before he was a production designer, and in fact, if I can tell this story, Kevin and I were friends or acquaintances before we worked together. 10 years before I moved here in 1984, and I had a friend who knew Kevin and said, the only way you get into a club is to push your way to the front and get inside. So it was the time of Area in Danceteria, and you would shove me to the front of the club and we'd get inside, and cut to 10 years later, he's no longer an architect, he's a production designer. I'm now a filmmaker, and this happened. Do you remember this at all?
No.
Maybe it was somebody else. No, but yeah.
I remember being bartenders together. No.
I was a busboy.
So I think to talk about how the film got to this point, we have to also go backwards a little bit and talk about 55, if that's what you call it, for a moment, because, and you can tell me how much of this is legend and how much of this is factual, but my understanding is there was a screening of your cut of the film, 2-hour rough cut of the film, for Miramax, for Harvey Weinstein, and that didn't go very well. What do you remember about that experience of showing it for the first time outside of the group of filmmakers to the distributor, and then what happened? What were some of the discussions that led to what happened next?
This is, you know that, well, there's that cliche that we can't remember pain that well, otherwise no woman would ever have a second child. So I don't remember. Put it this way, it was very painful, but I'm not the first director to have his film taken away and recut by the studio, and unfortunately I will not be the last director to have his film taken away and recut by the studio. I'm just thrilled to have this crazy thing happen now.
But it's very seldom that people get to do what you did, so that actually is quite lucky for all of us.
Yes, exactly. And it's called Tenacity, and it's called Jonathan King also, who was the associate producer here, but was the producer of the director's cut and kept knocking at Miramax's door every year, right? So the fans, some of you are out here, would email me and say, what's up with that cut? What's going on? And then I would, email John or talk to John, and then John would, talk to Miramax, and finally in June, I think it was June last year, they were like, all right, yes, okay, go, yes, do it. So
Ira, what kind of context can you add to this story?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that Mark is giving himself too little credit for tenacity. I mean, like every time we got together over the 17 years, there was always this moment where, don't you think it would be really good if we went back and tried to make this, put the movie back to the way it was and get it out there? And, my sort of sensible head was saying, I don't know if anybody's going to ever let you do that. It doesn't, but he made it happen. He just didn't give up, and that's the reason why we're able to see it the way it is. But I have to say, to go backwards, because Mark won't talk about this because he's being really kind. When I was brought on to this film, the minute that I got involved, I could see that there was definitely a disconnect between Mark's vision of the movie and the studio. And it was clear to me that at every stage of the game that they kept coming back with notes where he was trying to be a really good sport about it and doing the rewriting that they wanted him to do, but not going further than he was comfortable doing, and they kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And there was a moment in time where, we were talking about this last night, where Mark actually forgot about this, where we were hoping that the option on the screenplay would actually expire so that we could bring it somewhere else and get it made. And then at that point, we got word that they had actually bought out the rights, which meant that he was tied to it, to them to make the movie. And I knew at that point that, this is not looking real good.
Why didn't you tell us that?
Yeah, I tried.
Kidding.
Yeah.
And the restoration process is quite an undertaking, and my hat's on, but my hat's off to you, because it's an enormous amount of work to research and find this material. Studios don't save movies. They don't archive things. Film preservation is a whole issue that people spend their lives involved with. So to find the music and the soundtrack and the dialogue tracks and to remake the mix and even the video that was transferred to digital, whatever the final version of the film is, was a yeoman's work. So it's remarkable. Given everything else, it's remarkable that it even was technically possible to see what we saw tonight.
Yeah, and Mark didn't mention this, but there's actually VHS footage in here. Like some of that stuff that he was talking about being underground is literally off of a VHS cassette, which is remarkable that it's up on the big screen and it's actually viewable. And there were a few things that you couldn't actually do, right? I mean,
in other words, we kind of had to select. So this negative, it's a 17-year-old movie, and everything that Lee is talking about, trying to find all that material is incredibly difficult. The sound is here, the dailies are there, the negative is here. It's kind of spread out literally all over the world.
And no one bothers to keep track of where it's gone. Sometimes it's just in a box somewhere and it's been left and forgotten.
Well, it is literally in a box somewhere and often forgotten, sometimes on giant pallets and forgotten. So what happened is we didn't have an EDL or an edit decision list, which would have been very easy. You just plug that into the Avid and there's your director's cut. We didn't have that. We had cobbled it together from VHS. And so we had to find the VHS dailies. Now, who on earth would keep their VHS dailies for 17 years? By some miracle, Miramax did. But my associate producer, Nancy Valley, found them by crawling around a 90-degree warehouse up in the Grapevine in LA, and she found this big shrink-wrapped pilot with marked to be destroyed on all sides of it. So she's like, looks interesting. So she pulled it back, and it was all our dailies. So had she not found it that day, there would be no movie. Because then those dailies could be used to eye match the 44 minutes of missing stuff, and then there was a time code, and then the time code could then be used to go back and find the negative, and then some of the negative was missing. So there were certain scenes, for instance, in Liz Van Gelder's fabulous Park Avenue house, they go into the bathroom afterwards, and Shane finds out what a troglodyte means. Oh. And in that scene, the scene goes on a little bit, but it's such a beautifully lit and shot scene that if I up-resed VHS video into this movie, it would just look bad and it would take you out of the movie. So we had to cut that piece, and it seems to work fine. But where Shane walks up to the balcony for the first time, that negative was missing as well. But the video looks great, right? It's like, you know, I feel like it not only feels very 70s, but it's like, yeah, that's my battle scars from, you know, doing this restoration.
And that's in the Knock on Wood kind of section of the film, maybe, right? Is that what
it's before Knock on Wood.
Oh,
it's
right.
where he first walks up and everyone is having sex up in the balcony and he touches the girl and all that stuff. So that whole first shot is VHS. And then some things literally like those opening shots, like we had a choice to do up-res video or negative, and I was like, let's set it off right, you know, let's make them all sort of up-res video and give you flashes of what that was like to give you this sense of the 70s. And then instead of pushing credits out at you, which a lot of movies do and which 55 does, we decided to suck the credits backwards, as if we're sucking you back into the 70s. So that was a big part of it as well. And what was really important with you know, Kevin's work was that he worked very closely with our DP Alexander Grushinsky, who, it's very hard to light a club in darkness, so we nicknamed him the Second Prince of Darkness. And he, you know, to shoot a film on negative in darkness and to have Kevin's work and Karen's work show through is really incredibly difficult, and they did an amazing job. Now when 55 came out, they pushed all this light into it, and so suddenly it looked like your kitchen at noon. So all of that work that we had done to make it look like we experienced nightclubs, this dark place with flashes of lights and glitter and blah, 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 was gone. So you've got to see your work now the way that you had built it, you know, and Karen as well, right? Or Karen, you probably saw less, which means you saw more, right? More what we intended.
I have one more question for Ira before we go to the audience. If you have a question, get ready. Ira, in addition to being a producer and a distributor, you're an academic. And I thought it would be interesting for you to contextualize this film for us from a social perspective. The film went from 54 to 55 in a moment that was very different from today's. Queer content was looked at differently, certainly from a mainstream perspective. So if one analysis of the reason for the film changing so much from 54 to 55 was the fact that queer content maybe couldn't be as mainstream as today, if that's a correct reading, I think it would be interesting to hear you, as someone who's produced other films with queer content, contextualize sort of not only what happened from 54 to 55, but how that relates to kind of the moment we're in now.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I hate to be the expert on this particular subject, but what I would say is, first of all, the context of your question is correct, which is that there definitely was a moment in time when this film was being developed where it was not considered to be a mainstream subject, to have content that was quite so overtly gay. And yet, on the other hand, there's no doubt that at least, you know, in all the drafts of the script that I read, that part of the intent was to point at Studio 54 as a moment when gay culture was actually coming out. I mean, not coming out in quotes, but being more mainstream, being part of the conversation in a different kind of cultural way. So, so that debate was definitely going on without ever being discussed during the entire development of the film, and then eventually the creation of 55 was clearly, I don't want to go as far as saying scrubbing the movie, but definitely changing its emphasis to make it more palatable commercially. So here we are 17 years later, and there's no doubt that there's nothing in this movie that would be a problem from a mainstream commercial point of view. And what has, what's changed? I mean, the entire culture has changed. I mean, in all the ways that we all know about at this point. Hopefully in the next 2 weeks we'll have a Supreme Court decision that's going to take it one step further. But the reality is that the world, even if you look at it from the cynical commercial perspective, there's no doubt that the environment today is much more accepting of something like this than would have been true 20 years ago.
And I have to say, in our early screenings, sometimes, much to my surprise, audiences would object to the depiction of sex and violence in the film. And I was kind of blindsided a little bit by that. I was going along cutting the movie and thinking all the sex and violence was fine. It all seemed fine to me. And I was surprised to find that audiences in 1998 objected to the idea of sex and sex and violence. Am I saying sex and
you keep
drugs?
Saying violence.
I mean drugs.
Like, where's
sex and drugs is what I mean. And that's when I kept thinking. It totally took me by surprise. Sex and drugs. What's the big deal?
Right. It is a movie about Studio 54.
Right.
Yeah. Sex and drugs.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So, Mark, is the movie we saw tonight? Is it the movie that you wrote and intended for us to see 17 years ago?
Yeah. At its heart, it really is, I would say, yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. And might I add, the movie that we all signed up for, and I mean, I hope you guys agree. Yeah. Karen, do you agree? And certainly the actors agree, so that's been really thrilling as well for them to come out and support the film as well.
Well, let's see what the audience wants to ask. Take some questions before we head across and have some drinks and talk a bit. So we'll go here, and then we'll work our way over. Yes, right here. Is your question about the rating for the film?
Yes.
Oh, are they rated? Are the films rated differently?
This film is unrated. It's on iTunes, by the way, for those who want it. It's on iTunes.
And what was the original? What was the 55 rating?
It was rated R.
R?
Yeah, yeah.
I never pay attention to those things.
Yeah, it was rated R, and this would be rated R, but it's not rated.
It's unrated, which is awesome on iTunes because it says unrated. And now it's an editor's pick, and we're all very happy.
Okay, so we'll go here and then work our way back there. Yes, hi.
Who owns the film now, and will it have a theatrical release?
The question is who owns the movie, and maybe you can speak to how it's being distributed and how it will be distributed.
Yeah, so Miramax owns it. You do this thing when you're a writer, director, called the Certificate of Authorship. And you can work on something for 1,000 years, and you sign this thing, and it becomes theirs. So we have separated rights, Miramax and I, but they own the movie, and it is on iTunes right now in the United States. It's being released. It's doing very well there. It's also playing festivals around the world, LGBT festivals and mainstream festivals, which is very exciting for me. This was sort of the idea that it would be fluid and that it would cross all boundaries. And so that's been terrific. And yeah, and so next is, for all of you who are going to be in LA on July 16th, Hollywood Forever Cemetery. We'll be watching the movie Under the Stars, and I think on top of the stars. Right? I mean, I haven't seen a movie in a cemetery, but I'm guessing that's how it's going to work, right? I'll be like, hey, Charlie. Or Mr. Chaplin, wherever he's probably not buried in Hollywood, but Gloria, yeah. So
very good. Okay, so
oh, and also San Francisco. Anybody in San Francisco on Friday night? It'll be there at the Castro. But we're winding down the big festival screenings. This is one of the last, and And other than that, it's iTunes. And then France is really trying to do a theatrical distribution. We'll see about theatrical here. But, you know, really, Miramax is interested in digital. That's their thing. And Lionsgate is distributing it, and they're very excited right now. They broke the top 20, and that makes them very happy. So, sorry to sound like a producer, but if you watch the final credits, that's my first producer credit. So I know what I'm talking about.
Okay, so we'll go back there and then work our way up. Yes.
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering, what was it, relationship-wise, what was the casualty of going from your original cut to 55? I'm kind of assuming it had to do, to a certain extent, with the gay subplot, like exploring, you know, Shane and Breckenmeyer, and kind of, I would imagine that was kind of banged in 55, but I have amnesia.
So this is a question to maybe more explicitly explain what changed from 54 to 55 for those who may not remember the original.
You mean other than 45 minutes worth of footage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The triangle and the overtones maybe between Jane and Breckenmeyer and, you know, the kiss.
Well, there are two different stories. I mean, one story is the 55 is a different story. You know, that is a straight love story, and that's with 30 minutes of reshoots. The original 54 was always about a love triangle between these three people. I don't know if we've spoken about Cabaret at all, but Cabaret, being one of my favorite movies, was a real inspiration for me. It's this world on the edge of collapse, in this case in the Weimar Republic in Berlin, and at the center of it is a love triangle between two men and a woman. And that was a real inspiration for me in making this movie. This is this fabulous, exciting place, this unique, decadent world on the edge of collapse. And at the heart of it, you have this love triangle between two men and a woman. And so this owes a lot to Cabaret. And in certain places, we actually knocked off scenes where we let the dinner table scene is sort of like the scene at the castle of the Baron in Cabaret, and another scene we knocked off is where the three of them are dancing together on Christmas Eve, and they're almost about to kiss. That's also from the Baron's castle. And the crazy, crazy irony, and why I love New York City so much, is that we rented that space, Kevin, right, when they were in trouble. The Studio 54 was in trouble, and so we rented it to do shoot the exterior of the club and to shoot the exterior of 53rd Street with the drugs, and then to the walk down the lobby, because the lobby was still in good shape. But the interior of the space was in disrepair. So we got a week to shoot those three locations that I mentioned, and I think helped them out a little bit. And then the movie came out, and then a year later, this theater company called The Roundabout moved into Studio 54 with a musical called Cabaret, which is still there, right? So, me love New York.
That's great. Okay, all the way in the center towards the back, and then we'll go up here. Yes, yes.
So I remember I saw the film. I had read about it before it came out, and I was really excited to see it. I went to see it, and it was disappointing. And I had read that about what happened and how it wasn't the movie you intended. And I actually wrote this letter to Entertainment Weekly saying that, you know, they just marketed it to the wrong people. You know, they were trying to market it to teenage girls. And when they had their test screenings, I said, you know, they just showed the test screenings to the wrong people, because if they had showed it in New York or LA or San Francisco to the right crowd, it probably would have been a success. And I really think that part of the problem of what happened was it was a marketing problem with the film. Miramax didn't know how to market, you know, your movie, because Ryan Phillippe was in it and Breckenmeyer, and they wanted teenage girls
question is about marketing being, the analysis being that marketing was really the kind of key issue that caused the film to be viewed differently or to ultimately not work, bad marketing.
Well, so test screenings are this very blunt instrument, and some people take them more seriously than others. Right?
Yes.
So, yes.
For those who, and without, you can speak more generally if you need to, Ira, but test screenings can really, they can help you and they can do amazing things for a movie and a distributor's faith in a film, but they can also do the opposite.
Okay, I'll talk very generally, which is that test screenings are designed to intimidate filmmakers into doing what they feel is necessary. I mean, they're easily manipulable by doing exactly what you said, which is getting the wrong people in the room. You know, who's the target audience? And you know, like I had said earlier, that I had this sense very early on that the folks at the studio and Mark specifically had very different ideas about what movie they were trying to make, and it seemed like the folks at Miramax believed that they were making Saturday Night Fever, and that Studio 54, and by the way, conceptually, the idea of doing a movie at Studio 54 that was Saturday Night Fever is not a terrible idea, but it just wasn't the movie he was making.
Can I just say, though, has anyone seen Saturday Night Fever lately? It is dark and dirty and funky and funny and awesome, so I say I did.
Well, yes.
So,
no, but the
thank
difference,
you very much.
Yes, right. But yeah, the difference is that it wasn't gay.
Oh, that.
Yes.
I got confused. And actually, this isn't gay. I mean, one thing that's super fun about taking this movie around to the LGBT film festivals is there are no Bs. This is the only B. He's Shane is bisexual. He may be opportunistically bisexual, but his sexuality is super fluid, and I love that. And that seems to be very true to the era, true to people, and there's no judgment on it, and it's very exciting to be the only B in the crowd.
Okay, more questions. Yes, here. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about the casting of the film. Did you have the actors in the film in mind as you were writing it, or was that kind of sorted out during the auditions process? I'm wondering in particular about Mike Myers, like what you saw in him that would be perfect for the role.
You speak about the casting process, how the cast got involved, Mike Myers specifically. Did you have certain cast in mind when you were writing the movie?
No, never. I never have anybody in mind when I'm writing. I did do a lot of research with the kids who worked there, though, so I met a lot of... Did anyone work there as a bartender, coach, girl, or a busboy? Hands up.
We have one. Yeah.
Wait, who, where?
There was one in the middle there.
Is he still here?
Yeah.
Stand up. Yes? Bartender or busboy? Doorman. Is Mark didn't come, though, Mark Beneke, no? He was there. Well, yeah, we put him back in the movie, and I just heard from him, so he might have come tonight, but I think it was a little last minute. So anyway, so Mark Beneke was the original doorman, and we still give him that name in the film. But
Casting.
Yeah. Casting process.
You don't have actors in mind when you're
casting?
casting?
No, never. Really, from the research of the kids who worked there, and then fought really hard to get a Latina in the Latina role. You would be shocked in 1998 how hard that was. But the whole point about this movie is that it is the most and the least democratic of places. In other words, if you can get past the velvet, it's a little bit fascist outside on the street, but if you can get past the velvet rope, then it's the most democratic of places. So it doesn't matter what color, gender, size, what you are, it's a very democratic place. So it was very important to have a Latina in the role and make no big deal about it, right? So I was thrilled that Miramax actually helped me get Salma. In terms of Mike, it was actually his reps who came to us because it was the last role to cast. We knew it was a very plum role in the script, and we weren't agreeing on anything. And finally, Mike's reps came to us, and the second I heard his name, I thought, I think he can do it, because often comedians can play the tragedy, and the role has a lot of humor in it as well. And so I did my research, he and I met, we had a great lunch, and then we had 3 weeks of rehearsal. And where are my Celia Ward questions, by the way? Like, how great is she, right? Oh, is there a Celia Ward question? Yes.
But I'd like to thank you for making a movie that makes me want to dance, number one.
Thank you.
Number two, I'm still trying to organize everything that's being said. I think it's fascinating, but I don't need to know the reason, but I connected with Mike Meyer in a way in this film that I did not before.
Okay, so this is fascinating, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because everyone talks about how much better his performance is in this. Everyone's performance in this film, maybe aside from Celia's, has been completely recut. There is new material from everyone. All of the character arcs, all of the character relationships are different, except Mike's is almost exactly frame for frame the exact same performance. But when you change an entire movie around it, suddenly it shines even more. There's one thing, though. There's the cat scene. Kitty cat, you know, el gato, you know, that thing that he does with Breckenmeyer. So that scene has been restored. And then the scene in 55 where he comes back and says, "Thank you all for coming back. I've missed you. I've been in jail." Ooh, yeah. Ooh, remember that one? Ooh. So
I didn't get that far, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. There's that. And so, so that scene is missing, and instead there's the scene where Brecken offers himself to Mike. Other than that, Mike's performance is to the frame the exact same performance, but it's the movie that swirls around it. It's the story and the character development around it that makes people think it's an entirely different performance.
We're almost out of time, but I want to get to a few more. We'll go up here, and then we'll go back.
Tristan. What's that? Good.
How do the actors feel about the new cut?
They're thrilled. I mean, this is what they signed up for. I hate to speak for them, but yeah. Yeah.
Even the people whose roles are smaller now are thrilled.
Yeah. So Nev came to Mexico and did, you know, supported the film, and what was important for us was, you know, that she you know, that Julie Black was supposed to be Shane's fantasy. And in 55, she became something else that Nev and I and Ryan didn't understand. And so we'd meet, I think, Christian in whose ever hotel room, because Christian was shooting Trick at the time with my friend Jim Fall, who, by the way, was holding that footage underground, so it's all circular, right? So that underground footage comes from Jim Fall, who made the movie Trick with Christian in the lead. So Jim's shooting with Christian while I'm shooting with his sister Nev, right? So that was all going on at the same time. And we were trying to, you know, make sense of these scenes and make them better. And so I think, you know, Nev and I were very happy to have Julie Black become the fantasy that she's supposed to be. And, you know, Salma's back to being her complex, flawed self. The Mike character was always flawed. Restoring Ryan was very difficult because you can see sometimes how the film jumps. Have we talked about this at all? So
No.
this is, again, the good old Nancy. Remember Nancy, who was crawling around and found the pallet that was marked to be destroyed? She also had to find, like, 24 frames or 48 frames of film negative to complete Ryan's reaction. So Ryan's performance is rebuilt in this, sometimes spliced together in little tiny pieces, because it's those moments that create a performance and that create a story. And he's, you know, he's the lead, he's the viscera, he's the soul of this movie. He's Shane 54. So that was tough work, man.
I'm not sure whether they even understand how difficult it is. You know, that, you know, this film was shot in 35 millimeter, which means that every time there's a cut in the negative, you lose a frame. And so when you try to reconstitute a scene where the scene's been cut down and you're trying to add back footage that's continuous in the same scene, there's a frame missing. So there's like all this digital work that has to be done to actually make sure that you're not seeing some sort of a jump cut or whatever. And so there was a lot of that had to go on to do the restoration.
Yeah, and there were actually little moments, like talking about where we had to pick and choose things. There's a moment when, remember at the diner with their first time, and he's like, Shane's got the vial of cocaine, and Salma says, "Hello, friend," right? There is a moment where Ryan just looks around so confused, and we couldn't find that negative. And it's just that, so he's 99% back there, but it's like there's still little pieces of negative floating around in Canada or somewhere that I want. So,
we're almost out of time, I'm sorry to say. Yes, hi.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you guys for this undertaking. And the soundtrack, as a DJ, it's so wonderful because when that came out in '98, all of those disco records were out of print and no one could find them. And after Disco Sucks and Reagan and Bush and AIDS, there was like a complete destruction of all that music. And putting that out on a CD was like the first time that had been seen in the mainstream in so long. And I just wanted to say also, it was interesting in '55, it was a bit more of a cautionary tale. You guys ended it without, and no mention of Ian Schrager, really, in this one. And none of, nothing about what happened to Steve Rubell or anything past that. Any thought? It was less of a cautionary tale, more of a party ride.
The film is less of a cautionary tale, more of a party ride, is the comment.
Yeah. So anyway, what worked well with Ian is that he didn't particularly want to be in the movie, and that he was so behind the scenes that a lot of kids who worked there didn't even know that he was there because Steve was so the face of the club. So that was, that worked out well for everyone. And then in terms of a cautionary tale, that was not my cautionary tale. For me, no judgments was really important. I wanted to create a world that was true to that time, and we know what's to come, right? So this thing that's hanging over it is your knowledge, and the one place I sort of acknowledge it very quickly is where Ryan leaves the frame and we rack focus to the poster of the Village People ready for the 80s. And so there's your hint, ladies and gentlemen. Randy, are you here? Randy Jones? Okay, so one of our Village People was coming. But yeah, so, and I just wanted to really give a shout out to everyone, to Kevin and Karen and Lee and Ira and everyone who worked on the film, is that I was so lucky with this movie as a first-time filmmaker because I worked with all these filmmakers. Kevin considers himself a filmmaker. Lee does. Ellen Lutter, who, if anyone can find her, please send her my way. I could not find her anywhere, right? She considers herself a filmmaker. So when Shane walks into Steve's office and he's like literally sewn into his suede outfit, and Steve says that ought to be illegal, right? So that costume, that was Ellen. I had ideas for what I wanted him to wear, but she's a filmmaker, and so I got very lucky with working with all of these upcoming filmmakers and young actors, and it was just, it was a thrill to work with everybody, and to take that, to have that experience. And by the way, this is what I didn't know. Nev just told me in Mexico, she said, Ellen and I would look at certain gowns, because Nev was the fashion plate. Like you see her just walking by sometimes. For her to walk by in a scene took about 12 hours for her. For me, it took, a half an hour. But for her, it took 12 hours because she had to be the gown had to be built around her. So Ellen would find these, they were maps for these costumes. Do you know this, even? So there were maps for costumes, and sometimes they'd just give up. They'd say, we don't know how to put this onto a person, and then they'd go on to the next thing. But there's a certain costume that she's wearing where she's literally wearing facets of a disco ball. So it takes several hours to sew you into that,
We're going to have to stop there, but we can continue to talk.
Oh, can
across-
JD, star of Alkali, Iowa, which was the movie, the short film, right? The short film I made right before this, JD Cerna was the star of that. Yes.
Which it means so much to be here and see this, because having gone as far back as I go with you in terms of your work as a filmmaker and watching you stick to your vision as an actor, and then to be here today with you means a lot, like, really does. My question for you actually is a question for the writer. Where did Dottie come from? I love her. So
Disco Sally. She was for real.
Okay.
Yeah. And the funny thing about the actress, though, Ellen died 2 months ago. She died while I was in Switzerland. So she was she literally died on the night of the premiere in Switzerland, and she died at 101. She worked until she was 100. She was 84 when she shot this movie, and she was so delightful. Just to walk on the set made you laugh. And there was a certain point. This is a good way to end this. She came up to me and she said, because the line is back there, and it was a very harsh line at the time. Now it's used quite a bit. But at the time, it was a very harsh line. And she said, Mark, what is this word kuntz? And I said, ask your husband.
We can keep talking across the way in the reception.
Let's go drink.
Congratulations. Woo!